and I want to welcome you to AP Art History Online. Over the next month or so, both myself and my colleague Allison Napier will be broadcasting to you at this time. And initially, we will be covering some of the content that some of you didn't get to during the year and integrating that with reviews. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll be breaking into all reviews. AP will be putting out a calendar so you can look ahead of time and see. And in addition, you'll be able to look up recordings of these shows if you have to miss it or you have another commitment at this time. But we are very, very excited to share with you. And I know that some of you are wondering, well, why are we doing something from the Pacific today if it's not on the AP tests? And we just, well, there's several reasons. We wanted to remind you that your college is expecting you to have studied or at least been introduced to some of this material that we didn't have time for in the year. And the second reason is this is just fabulous material, and I wouldn't want to leave any culture out. And so while we might not see everything, it's a really nice chance for you to see what was there. And then this could be a review for you if you are, if your teacher changed the order. I know that in my class, we do global contemporary work first in the year. So we will be making every day relevant to the AP exam for you because we will always connect the works that we talk about with works that will be on the test, okay? And of course, for you, it's just a good opportunity to always transfer your skills that you've been working on all year. So I'm going to share my screen now. I'm new to a PowerPoint, and let's see here. Here we go. Sorry, I've disappeared. There we go. Today, we will be talking about the theme of dress and kingship. Kingship may come to you as like power and authority or prestige or status, these kinds of things that you have already learned about in your class. This is a little bit about me. I'm talking to you from the West Coast, so it's morning. I just finished my pancakes, and wherever you are, I wish you well and to stay healthy. So today, our work is called the Hula. I'd like you all to say that right now, Hula. And that is a feather cape from the Pacific unit. It's from Polynesia, from Hawaii. And if you look at this page I have laid out for you, you'll see a preview, a review, and a practice. So that's basically what we will be doing over about the next 35 or 40 minutes. Okay, so here is your first look at the feather cape, the Hula. And, you know, when you think about dress creating prestige, the two things I always think of is number one, weddings. And number two, watching the Academy Awards. So you might have an example in your mind of people or royal people, leaders, anyone that uses dress to create prestige, okay? So here is the identifying information. The title, we don't know the artist's name in this case, so we say the culture, Hawaiian or Polynesian. Late 18th century, that's our window. And the materials, feathers and fiber. And you remember for your AP test that when you have to identify something, you need to get two of these four things. I'm just reminding you, and you'll have a chance to practice that later. Okay, I also wanted to show a couple of other feather capes. I think a really interesting question is, when something turns up in your AP set, you know, is it a typical object? Is it a special object? Is it a unique object, only one of a kind, like the Bayeux Tapestry? And in this case, there are about 160 royal feather capes in existence. And there, of course, could have been more over time. But here you've gotten to see a couple of different versions of a feather cape. So what I'd like you to do is you can take up pencil and paper, or you can just sort of say this out loud. This is something for you to do. And you'll see that in this prompt, there's describe, identify, and then describe again. So I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to see what you can come up with. Okay, if you didn't quite finish, that's all right. But I'd like you to kind of wrap up and in that very first part, describe three formal qualities. That's visual analysis. And we're going to come back and see, well, what are some of the things you might have said on that? And then in the second one, another example of a king or leader. I'm really excited about that because I know you all thought of different things or different people in your set, and we're going to come at the end and see who some of those possibilities are. Okay. First, I'd like to set the context of this work. We are in the Pacific region, and in this particular region, it's Polynesia. It's really nicely marked out by a triangle in this. You could see the triangle jigjags a little bit on the left, and that's to make room for the categorization of Melanesia. So in the next 2 days, we'll see something from each of the three regions of the Pacific. And when you think about it, the Pacific is this huge expanse of water dotted by islands. It's almost the exact opposite of, say, a continent like Asia, which is land that's dotted by lakes and rivers. So it's a very unique and unusual situation. And the art from this area is very, very diverse. And let's see, I missed out on this. I think to conceive of this in your mind, think of that triangle with Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand, because these three places are places that a lot of people know, where there's definitely some islands in there that you haven't heard of. Okay, so here is our feather cape. And I just wrote down some of the things that I thought of in terms of visual analysis. And it's quite possible that you thought of some other ones. And I was really struggling for my word where it says textural, but on this image, I think when we see this cape, if you can imagine this, it feels kind of heavy. And I just imagine myself putting it on, and it's thick, and I almost want to say unctuous or fat. It's got a fatness to it, like a heavy coat, I think. And it's that's what I mean by that. I had the privilege of seeing the exhibition of the feather cape at LA County Museum of Art a couple of years ago. And so I wanted to show some pictures from that exhibition. They did a really good job of traveling that show around the country. And so many of the museums right now, I wanted to remind you, are doing wonderful outreach and coming up with special programs, online programs. So I really hope you can avail yourself to some of those at the time. And you can see these really hold together as a group. So if we talk about the feathers, they come from two different kinds of birds, because I know that you recognize the limited palette of black, yellow, and red. And so this is a picture of the mamo bird, and the iwi bird, I'm going to let you look up online on the internet. And when you do, you'll be surprised. It's bright, bright red. It's an incredible looking bird. But most people are happy to know that the birds were not trapped and killed. They were trapped by expert trappers and a couple of feathers plucked away, and then the birds were released. So they were very careful about not, preserving the birds. Sadly, one of the two birds, and I believe it's the mamo bird, is extinct at this point in time because remember, these capes are coming from well over 100 years ago. And in addition to the capes, there is royal headgear. And I know that in our set, we have several nice examples of royal headgear that you've probably already seen or studied this year. And it's the same thing, a kind of a webbing framework. We'll talk about that later, and the feathers. And if you can imagine how many feathers it would take to do this, you could see why it's such a prestigious object. This is a history painting from Britain done in 1795. And this was about 20 years after the death of the explorer Captain Cook, the first European to go into Hawaii. And of course, when they got to Hawaii initially, there was a very nice relationship with the people living there that then went south as the people got into conflicts. And at one point in time, the British came back because the weather was bad. They couldn't sail away, and there was some thefts and misunderstandings, and basically an escalation of aggression between the two groups. And there was a riot that ensued in the death of Captain Cook, where he got knocked in the head. But of course, the reason for this great story is that look at the chieftain and what he's wearing. Okay, you can pick out both of the ceremonial cape and the hat. Okay, so I have some nice pictures of the very, very close up that the capes are degrading a bit, yes, but you get to look in and see the webbing. Now, depending on the time and place, there was two sources for the webbing. It was fiber. The fiber either came from coconut trees fiber, or from a plant that is related to the stinging nettle, if you know that plant. And so there was this fibrous matrix, and the feathers were hooked in. So that's a little bit about the construction. And in terms of the people involved with production, I already talked about special people who trapped the birds, harvested the feathers. The weavers were men, and they spent time weaving putting these garments together. And when they did that, they weren't sort of talking about sports and stuff. They were they were chanting prayers, and they were, kind of doing really serious stuff that was imbuing these capes with the mana. Okay, so the capes, the colors and patterns were based on genealogy. This is a very important thing, family trees and whatnot. And if you think of like crests in medieval art, or if you think of sort of the Scottish and Irish have the kind of tartan patterns that go with families, it was very much the same. And it wasn't like Hawaii was, sort of consolidated under one chieftain. There was many chieftains, and so and then in terms of the colors, the red had some sort of symbolic quality. It was symbolic of royalty. And then the yellow was symbolic of prosperity. And here you can see another sort of a family member, not necessarily a chieftain, that was wearing this very prestigious, you know, garment. So mana is a very important concept to most all Pacific art. In fact, in the Pacific, they really wouldn't have the word for art like we know it, but it would be more like an object that contains power. And the mana is a way of is their word for that. And the mana you could think of as the life force, and you could also think of it as a protective force for the person who was wearing it. So what I'd like to do is I have another task for you right now. I'd like you to read this placard from the show about the Hawaiian feather capes. And I want you to pick out two things from this text that you think are important, that you'd like to take away. And I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so I'm very interested in what you're thinking, but one of the things that really struck me here was their heavenly status. So again, these leaders are making a play to be known as or thought of as descendants of the gods, and we've seen that in other cultures. So that's something to kind of take away with you. I think another interesting thing is how coveted these things were, and if you did lose a battle, it's definite that your cape would get taken from you as plunder of war. Okay, so we're going to some comparisons now, but before we do that, I want to just leave you with the idea of you know that the Hawaiian capes were worn into battle. The second thing, though, that they could be worn at ceremonies, important ceremonies, weddings or whatever, and that they would always convey status to the other people. The third thing we could talk about is that they were used as gifts. And here I would like to compare to this other feathered work, because when Captain Cook, went to Hawaii, he was given a gift of one of these things. And this work on the left, it's part of the lore of the work is that it was given to Cortez by the ruler Moctezuma. Now we can't totally prove that happened, but that's something that's kind of out there in lore and legend. The work from the Mexica or the Aztec is made also of feathers, but quetzal or quetzali feathers, a very beautiful large bird from Central America, and some other feathers as well. This part of the story of this work is, of course, it wound up in Europe, it got sent to Europe, it got diverted, ended up in a museum in Austria, and the people in Mexico have been really lobbying hard to get it back to their country. But for now, they have to live with a copy of it. And I think there's some nice parallels in the prestigious quality of this work that really links the wearer to the gods. Now, here you see another work that you studied. Therefore, I'm waiting for you to identify it before I show you the answer. Okay, so hopefully you recognize it right away, and that is the Alta Capu tunic from the Inca. And it is my hope that you knew that right away, because this is a work that could be on your AP test, of course. And this work was also created by, I'm just reviewing here, was created by special people, but in this case, they were women, special women that were sort of kind of collected and sequestered to do this weaving. And they had a special social status as well. They had to do three things to make these this tunic. They had to spin, and then dye, and then weave. And of course, there's two kinds of fibers in this, as you see there: animal fibers and cotton fibers. Any of the brightly colored ones are from animals, because those animal fibers take dye in a way that plant fibers do not. So if you see here, this the little squares are the tukapus, and this is the all tukapu, which means it has all of them. A regular high status person might have a garment with just a couple on there, but this is for the Inca, the supreme ruler who has everything, complete control over the empire is signified by this in terms of taxes, ethnicities, um, jobs that people, all kinds of things. So if you're asked to say, well, what do these different things signify? They can signify peoples, places, and social roles. And my favorite one, well, that I happen to know, is the checkerboard, because that one represents the army. And of course, the leader always has to have a good command over the army. Okay. So moving on, this painting is not in your set, but this man that you're looking at was the patron of a very important work in your set, which is Chateau of Versailles. And that is Louis XIV, the Sun King, and wearing an incredible robe or cape that was a nice comparison to the prestige of the Hawaiian feather cape. Okay. Here is another leader, another king, an emperor, and I like this comparison because he is wearing a garment. Okay, so as I'm talking, I'm waiting for you to identify this. Hopefully you identified it right away. And it's Augustus of Primaporta. But I really wanted to talk a little bit about his cuirass, and that is his breastplate, because that is nice garment that he has on, and it is decorated. It's by the way, if you were to see one in real life, it would be made of thick leather, and it probably, for the average soldier, would not have any decorations like this. But in this case, Augustus is really wearing his resume. He's broadcasting some things about his achievements and what he has done. Okay, and if you look at this, it's a little blurry, but you can look at this part in the middle. This is a scene of the Romans reclaiming their standards from the Parthians. So it harkens back to a great military victory. Of course, we know that Augustus ushered in the Pax Romana. And when you usher in a long period of peace and prosperity, people love you, and they're very happy because they're prosperous. In addition, the artwork has some other techniques for elevating the status of the emperor. One is the reference to ancient Greece, the Golden Age, looking back on the Golden Age by using the proportions of Polyclitus in a very well-known pose. And then the other one, of course, would be that link to the gods, because down on the left-hand corner there is Cupid, reminding us that Augustus comes from a lineage of the gods by way of Venus and Cupid. And here is yet another royal person. And I'm going to give you a moment to identify it. Remember that on your AP test, you need 2 of the 4. So you can say title, artist or culture, date, and material. Okay, so here we go. And hopefully you remember this. Now, is another example of an important garment, the way clothes are important. And there's a couple of things. One is that Theodora is wearing purple, and that is a color reserved for the emperors, for the royals. And it's very important that they wore that. And in fact, when they had the Nike riots in Constantinople, there was a moment where things got very sketchy, and the emperor wanted to, Justinian wanted to flee from the town, and Theodora had this kind of iron-willed grip and said, "No, we're not leaving. I will never stop wearing the purple. I will never take it off." So it's like they dug in, and they end up, of course, prevailing. And that site of the Nike riot became the site of the great church. So on the bottom of her gown, you'll notice some people walking, okay? And those are, you may know, the 3 kings bringing gifts. So again, it is an alliance, a blending, a relationship with the sacred, with the religious, that helps to elevate the status of the leader. Okay. Now, I know some of you are probably saying, Mr. Gunnan, George Washington is not a king, of course, but we want to broaden this to think about leaders of any sort. Okay, because you know, George is chosen not a toga. You know, Houdin was a neoclassical sculptor. He probably would have liked to have sculpted George Washington in a toga to harken back to that classical era. But George Washington said no. He's dressed more like a common man. He's got his uniform on, and a lot of students always remember that he's probably missing a button somewhere. It's just showing him, identifying him with the people and not with anything higher. So it's a nice, nice comparison, okay? And there's other iconography as well. So today we have looked at one new work from the Pacific. You know that work quite well. And that is the feather cape. And then we've plucked out some kings and leaders to review, all people that could turn up on the AP test, as well as talking about the theme of power, prestige, authority, and how it's represented. Okay, so I want to have a fun question, because I always like to have a fun question. What if any of these rulers could meet? Would they be persuaded? Could they be persuaded in trying on the feather cape? The reason I came up with this question is when Captain Cook went to Hawaii, one of the chieftains took off his cape and draped it onto Captain Cook. And you know, what do you do when you meet someone from a different culture? So think about this. It also forces you to know a little bit about these rulers. You know, what were they like? I mean, some rulers had to be very ruthless, especially in ancient Rome. Some rulers showed a lot of wisdom and tact, and you know, it's very interesting. And it just reminds me too that when Europeans came into the New World, a lot of times they were met with things as gifts that were the very most special things that the people had to give. Okay, so This is what I'm going to leave you with today. This is a practice work for the AP test. You have to identify something and explain and compare, okay? And I'm sticking with the theme of kingship. I think it's a very nice theme. And I've given you the choices of the Oba from Benin, King Narmer, or Henry IV, all kings that are represented in your set. Okay. I'm very excited about going from here. Tomorrow you'll have Miss Allison Napier. So this is John Gunnan signing off until next time.